Hey there guys, and welcome to my studio table. If you're new here, my name is Susan Ethicott. I'm a long-time professional artist and of late a master's student in visual art. And today I'm going to give you a little tour of some of the artist books that I have made in my art practice. So go grab yourself a cuppa and let's settle in and we'll go through all of these different artist books that I've made. So I'm going to start off chronologically with the first book that I made, which is this one here, which I think I made around 2022, and it is just in a craft paper cover that's been watercolour painted. And this one I made just as an exploration, a mixed media exploration. At the time I was doing a lot of work with stencils and starting to develop my own stencils from Botanicals, which is what this is. This is actually a commercially bought stencil, but I was really playing around with ideas to do with nature and shadows and silhouettes in nature. So it's a very free and open kind of artist book. I've used a variety of different papers and I've just bound it with a simple book binding here of thread through some holes through the center. So just to give you a little tour, I'll just flip through and show you some of the mark making I made. This book was really quite instrumental to me developing more of an interest in stencils, but also collage. I had so much fun making this book and playing around with different papers and different mark making with watercolor, etc. This page here is actually just baking paper that I've used, which isn't actually a brilliant surface to use in a book, but it was all about using non-traditional papers for me in this project. This here is actually a piece of palette paper that I thought was particularly beautiful. And you can see there's just plain cartridge with painting and mark making in there as well. There's a few more stencils that I made. I'm just getting very free with, I think, like just the top of the paint bottle. I remember spreading all these papers out on the floor and just really letting rip one day and having a really fun time just doing my mark making. I also used quite a few metallic paints. There's a bit of really old brown paper. I don't even know if you can buy this type of brown paper anymore. I haven't seen it for years. I also collaged in some leaves, a bit of black paper with some different mark making on it. This is another stencil of a beautiful pod design, and then another stencil there on some tissue paper, just playing around with mirror images as well. So I remember working on all these pages separately and then putting them together into order and then collaging pieces in. Just some beautiful free drawing and some strips of paper. This one's a lovely collaged element of a fern. Some more collage in there. And then these were a couple of landscapes that I did, which were the very first phase of me exploring an autumnal landscape. And I ended up doing a whole exhibition. Actually, this book here was the artist book I made as I was working on that exhibition. But these were sort of two of the very first watercolors that I did that were starting to think about those shapes and colors. So this is sort of, you can see the threads starting to lead into bodies of work, which is why artist books are so great, because sometimes you come up with ideas that become quite compelling. A bit more metallic, a lovely little piece of palette paper there, collaged geranium leaf. So I was also working a lot with thinking about pressed botanicals as well, which has become something I've played more with in current times. So another beautiful stencil and some watercolour. So yeah, it's just a lovely free-form book. Such a great way to explore different ideas and just have fun. I actually did this book in the school holidays one year when my kids were home from school, and we had a lovely time in the studio because they made artist books as well. A few more of the stencils there. And you can just see That's another piece of palette paper. So really had a lot of fun exploring incidental surfaces. Some more of those beautiful watercolour on brown paper. And another stencil there. So that was the first artist book that I made. The second one I made is this little one here, and you can see that the cover is made out of a very similar watercolour artwork to the one you saw in that book. And this was the artist book I made in the lead up to my exhibition, Autumnal Dreamscapes. And yeah, so that became the front cover, which I really love. And again, it's just got that stitched binding, very simple stitch binding there. And it's just on it's actually brown cut, it's pattern making card, which I have a big roll of. So in this one, I was really thinking a lot more about autumn and the autumn colours, and I've literally got some autumn leaves in here. And starting to really think about also using that brown background more intentionally in my art. And that exhibition, I did quite a few artworks that had the linen background for the first time. And you can just see me here playing around with a few loose tree/leaf shapes and really just having to think about how I can loosely interpret the landscape predominantly where I grew up, which is in northeast Victoria, where we have a lot of European trees, particularly up near where I am, near the high country. We have the most beautiful autumns. It is a landscape that's very colonised, and we have a lot of deciduous introduced species trees up there. So this exhibition very much is exploring that landscape that I grew up with and these beautiful trees and the ritual that my family had of travelling up into the high country to look at these beautiful trees as they turned in autumn. It was a really special time in our life. And I'll also try and find some footage to slot in here of my exhibition that I had at the end of, I can't remember which year it was now. I want to say the end of 2022 or 2023, but I could be wrong. The years seem to speed on by these days. But yeah, I'll find some footage to show you. I had it at a great gallery that's really close to where I live, the Old Butcher's Shop Gallery, which is in Soldiers Hill, the suburb where I live. It's literally just down the hill, a couple of blocks away from me. And yeah, that was a really successful exhibition for me. It sold out. It was a beautiful celebration of autumn and that beautiful time of year when the light is at its most gorgeous and everything's turning to seed and going brown and russet coloured. So yeah, this is the book that I made as I was making artwork for that exhibition and thinking about making that body of work. So I'll just flip through now and give you a little look. Again, I'm using very similar papers to the last one, some of that really old brown paper. I hadn't worried about anything to do with them being archival. They're really just for my own personal exploration. I love this one here with the brown paper and the mark making with the Neocolor 2 pastels and some beautiful collaged elements as well. I also made quite a few works using those handmade stencils that I started exploring in the previous artist book. So you can just see some of those stencils there, and again in reverse with the gold. I used quite a lot of this beautiful bronze goldy colours in my botanical stencils for this exhibition. A couple more shapes that are cut out from other papers collaged in. Just working with a texture tool with this one and then collaging a leaf on top. Another broad strokes one and just some simple lines. This is some painting on some baking paper, which I think every time I open this book a little bit more peels off because paint doesn't really stick to it. But I just love the texture of it and I love using it in books a little bit. So it's in quite a few of these earlier ones. So you can see I'm just really playing around with a lot of abstract forms and textures. Variety of different papers. Again, they're playing around with that idea of the loose autumnal landscape. I mainly work in acrylic in these books and Neocolor pastel. I think one of the big things I figured out as I was making this book was my colour scheme and which colours I was going to work with. And also I think working on the brown paper really influenced me working on the natural linen for the first time. A bit of black paper, another piece of brown paper with some loose watercolour on it and some collage. And then another stencil there. It's a piece of palette paper stuck in, just exploring a few more of those silhouettes. I also started working with collage in a very intentional way in this exhibition. So I think through the process of both that previous book I showed you and this one, I started to really see that I wanted to bring in monoprints that were cut in different shapes as stencil objects in my paintings, which I really love that landscape series that I did in that style. And I'll try and find some footage to slot in here so you can see how I was painting the linen backgrounds and then bringing in the collage elements over the top that I made with paper. And I would actually really love to explore that again, but I think that might wait until after I've finished my master's. Okay, and then this one just has a little bit more painting and collage elements on brown paper. Can see I'm really thinking about how I've simplified those shapes and forms that I ended up using in those final artworks. And yeah, that brings us to the end of that little book. So that's a lovely little one. The next artist book I made was this one, and this one I made, and I haven't actually finished it. It's not bound yet. There are still a few loose elements that I found in it before as I was flipping through it, and I thought I really must get into finishing this one actually, because this was the book that I started when I did my exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ballarat in 2024, just prior to starting my master's. And that exhibition was the first time I started to research Louisa Anne Meredith, who is my current research subject for my master's. And so this really encapsulates the thinking that I had around that exhibition and the techniques that I wanted to use for that exhibition, and also that first foray into playing with a historical subject in my artwork. So the cover is actually in linen for this one. So this is the exhibition where I sort of extended a little bit more on my technique of painting on natural linen in acrylic. And I did a lot of leaf motifs and playing around with leaves and the spines of leaves in this exhibition. So again, I'll go and find some footage. I'm sure I've got some in the archive of that exhibition that I did at the Art Gallery of Ballarat, so that you can see how this artwork in this book relates to what I produced for that exhibition. I think I also have a whole video which gives you a tour of that exhibition, so I won't put too much of the footage in here, and I'll leave a link in the description so you can go and find that video if you want a closer look. But yeah, inside this cover, which is the linen, and it didn't adhere very well, which I remember being a bit upset about, that I didn't get a very good adhesion, so I must see if I can fix that somehow one day, or just leave it and not worry about it. So this has a piece of craft paper with a monoprint on it, and I absolutely love how this mark making came out. I can't even remember exactly what I did. I might have been doing some botanical printing with the gel plate. I remember making a lot of experiments with monoprints for this exhibition, particularly ones that I then used to collage into the paintings. So there's all kinds of little bits hanging out in this book that have never been stuck. It's like I'm not complete. I might have to get into this book again, but I do actually really love what I have done. I think these ones might have been doing some botanical printing on the gel plate that I made this collage piece out of, and then this is just watercolour on craft paper. And I got really into working on craft paper for this book. This I have collaged in a photograph of me holding this flower in front of this linen that I had handwritten poetry by Louisa Anne Meredith onto. And I remember that this photograph was actually the aha moment that I had for this whole 25 canvas installation that was called An Ornamental Education, where I did portraits of flowers over her poetry for that exhibition. So yeah, this is the aha moment, and I wanted to capture that. I don't often collage in photographs, but I did quite a bit for this, which sort of is, I guess, the first time that I'm starting to think about photographic collage, which has been something I'm playing with a bit more in my masters. This is actually a shape of a begonia that I cut out to use as a collage element in a painting, and this is the reverse piece, and you can see the monoprint that I made and the texture that I used to cut out that begonia shape. And I preserved the cutout of it and put it over the top in the book, and I think that's lovely to keep the other half of it in another form of art. And also to just play with the edges as another texture. Then we have more collage of photograph of a enlarged begonia there. I did a lot of begonias in this collection of paintings because my exhibition coincided with the Begonia Festival in Ballarat. That's just a lovely piece of tissue paper. I don't know if that's actually stuck down. It might be. I think it's stuck down. But that's a monoprint as well, and I just love the textures. Again, these are some photographs that I've printed out on craft paper of close-ups of begonias, so really playing with them enlarged as an abstracted element. It's a little leaf that I've cut out of I think I used a clear gesso over my ink and it spread, so I didn't end up using that one, but I thought that makes a beautiful leaf. And then this is me playing around with painting botanicals on linen, so I pasted that one in as well over the top of another little painting. And we've just got more monoprint textures, a bit of the Neocolour too. Again, some more begonias over a bit of watercolour. So I'm really just playing around with photographs that ended up becoming the focus of some of the flower portraits that I made of the begonias for that exhibition. I love these leaf shapes that are just painted in a beautiful Daniel Smith watercolour, which is called Undersea Green, which I absolutely love the granulation and the colour shifts in that. It's another begonia collaged over the top of just some blooms of watercolour. A leaf. I ended up using some interesting leaf silhouette ideas in my canvases for this exhibition. It's just a photograph of another artist that I printed out. This one is a huge leaf that I cut to shape and slotted in there with this idea of the inside of the spine of the leaves showing through. Lovely piece of monoprinted tissue paper. I absolutely love creating collage papers with tissue paper. Another interesting collage between photo and paper. Another begonia. This is another test of writing with a dip pen in ink, which I did for all of those canvases of the poetry of Louisa Anne Meredith. And this is a silhouette that I cut of Louisa Anne Meredith from a photograph, so that hasn't been put in there yet either, and I can see that my mind is coming alive with how I might complete this book one of these days. That's one of my first experiments, painting a winter rose, a hellebore on the linen over the top. So again, just working through some of the technical aspects of what I wanted to do for that set of paintings. Another begonia, this time collaged on this beautiful tissue paper. It's a lovely leaf silhouette that I cut as a pattern for cutting up one of the collage pieces. So I used that piece in this book while the other piece that I cut that was on the monoprint went into the painting. Other side of that leaf, and then just a playful little monoprint over the top. Then I've stuck a page in here, just a little half page of the tissue. Again, I've kept the outside of one of the collage pieces that I cut and pasted that in my book, keeping the reverse side. Again, doing the same thing there, but I don't think that one is stuck in very well. Another monoprint. I love this page actually. I think that's really beautiful, that monoprint. A couple of leaf shapes again that I've cut out of the linen. which may end up stuck in there one day if I get around to finishing this book. And here are some other leaves that I've cut that actually have the writing in them, so that's kind of cool too. And then we're getting toward the end of the book. I created a little pocket out of this piece of tissue, and I just stored in here a couple of the working bits as I was working through that body of work, and I thought I could slip other things in there as well. And then another begonia in there. And on this final page, I have a photo collaged in of Louisa Anne Meredith, which is interesting because I actually was recently in an archive in Tasmania and saw the original of this photograph, which is pasted into her own scrapbook or her artist book, which is a lovely moment of full circle in my research. And interestingly, I'm actually talking about my experience in the archive at a conference tomorrow at my university about discovering this album and the experience I had in the archive with it. And that just says my own love for flowers and the intense pleasure they afford me. And so that is the end of that book. So that's all the artist books I made prior to starting my master's. And yeah, I think this was the next one that I made, if I'm correct. So I started my master's just after that exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ballarat. I went into my research and I was very much continuing my research with Louisa Anne Meredith, but also in that early first year stage of my research, I spent a lot of time in archives looking at a lot of different female botanical artists from the 19th century and looking at their sketchbooks and different elements of scrapbooks, all kinds of different ephemera in archives. And I became quite enamoured with this idea of women working inside books and how precious they were to their creative process. So I started making my own artist books, sort of thinking about what do I want to record from my experience in nature and my garden and make it in such a way that it can be preserved for the future. So I started making these little accordion books, which you've probably seen quite a lot of over the course of my master's because I'm in and out of them all the time. So I started making these accordion sketchbooks which record my garden throughout the seasons. And this book is of my backyard in winter. So this is just my back steps. It's a little watercolour painting that I made. But I also pressed botanicals from my garden and pasted them in here. And they are actually from the season of when I painted these paintings. So we've got here a beautiful, I think it's a Chinese lantern. And then on this page, it's my hellebore garden and also where there's some periwinkles. So I have a hellebore here and also my back garden where the hellebore garden is and also a periwinkle pressed there. And then finally I have the other side of the hellebore garden and then I've just written a little bit here about hellebores and I've saved a little hellebore seed as well from my garden there. And then we progress on to the final panel, which is that back garden and my big pin oak tree that I have in my backyard. So, and that just says under grandfather tree, pin oak. So that was the very first book that I made in my master's, and I made these linen covers so that I could keep them bound up and make them a real experience for people because I love the experience of opening a book and getting an intimate look inside someone's creative process. So that was the first accordion that I made for my master's. So I'll move right along to this one, which is another accordion of my garden. This one is of my front garden in spring. So again, it was the same idea of pressing botanicals in my garden. This one is japonica and it's in this front garden. You can see it just here. And these are my camellias and this is my front veranda. And this is one of the camellias that you can see here that I pressed. And then we move on to a centre view looking out from my veranda onto the hedge that we have out the front of our house. And these two little plants here, they grow in these little pots on my veranda. And then this one is a white camellia, which is this one here. And then we have the pond in my front yard. So we have a little climbing daisy and also a variety of different flowers that grow in the garden beds around here. And then in the final illustration, I have this view of my house from the side and some of the hedges there, and this garden bed here, and this blossom here is this blossom tree there. That's a weeping cherry, I believe. And again, I'm going blank on all the names of my flowers. I know what it is, and I must write it in here actually at some point, because I do think it's really important to include context in these books. So I will add those in at some stage. So there was a lot more writing in the first one, and I actually really like the intimacy that creates. But I haven't completed writing in this one. And I think that will probably start to happen around the time I write the chapter where I talk about these books in my master's, because it will become clearer what I want to write in there. So that was the second one that I made. And then there are several other in progress at the moment. There's one of my parents' garden that I need to complete, but the other complete one I thought I'd share with you today is just this little one, which are sketches of the forest that I encountered in Scotland. So again, there's a whole video series about this experience I had in Scotland and the artwork that I've made out of it. This is just some graphite sketches that I did on an accordion from some photographs that I took of that encounter. And then I have used these drawings quite a lot in developing my painted work as well. So that is another little experience that it captured that I think I will write something into at some point, because I actually wrote about this in the last chapter I wrote for my master's, and have a bit more of an idea of what I will put in there. So watch this space as to how they will work out. And then finally, before I go, I wanted to show you this big beauty. So this one I called A Book of Blossom, because this book contains pressed botanicals from my garden. They're all blossom or things that were blooming in my garden during this same spring actually that first book was from. And I wanted to make a book of blossom that recorded that moment in my garden, because it's so incredibly beautiful. And so, yeah, this is the book that I've made. Again, I still consider it a work in progress, because I think there'll be some other elements entering here that I'm still thinking about. And it's interesting to record this video because it's actually giving me a lot of ideas about how I might include some of the elements that I had in some of these books into these books. But yeah, they're just a much slower gestation making these books, because it's a more considered process doing them during my master's. So I can't pull this out for you as an accordion because it's much too big. So again, this book has the linen cover. This is actually linen that can be painted on if I want to make paintings on these covers, which I'm still undecided about. I kind of really just like the plain linen on the outside so that they look kind of anonymous, but then you open them up and they're this adventure. So in this book, I have pasted in beautiful big botanical specimens. So this is one of the blossoms from the tree in my front garden. And over the top, I have this beautiful Japanese print paper that I have painted onto with a iridescent watercolour. So each of the pages has one of these fly leaves with the watercolour and then the botanical specimen pasted inside. And I just think they're so incredibly beautiful on their own. I have left in some of the tags that I use in my collecting and specimen. I kind of like that idea of maybe including some of the ideas that I have on these little tags and letting them do some of the storytelling. But again, I'm still thinking about it. So these are a couple more blossoms in my garden. Absolutely love this particular shape of this specimen underneath. I have these leaves currently going upwards, but I actually may change them so that they're in between the pages because I find it's a little bit awkward to have to lift them up. But I am still thinking about how I want the book to be read and what sort of experience kinetically I want the person who looks at it to have. This one's a bit wrinkly because underneath is this very chunky magnolia, which I absolutely love. It's still got the moss growing on it. And I do have a whole video back in the archive, which again, I'll link to in the description, which shows you the process of collaging these botanical specimens into this book because it was quite an experience. Again, we have this little tag here from this beautiful blossom. Another one there, which tells me what it is. The one there. I think they could be a very interesting way to tell a little story. Another page there. And then coming on to the last one. So it's so super long if it gets opened out, but it'll be interesting to see how this one goes in the exhibition. Anyway, so that is my little tour of some of my artist books, most of them. There's a few that I've done in the past that aren't here, but I thought they were the most relevant to walk through and talk to you about. So I hope you've enjoyed this little tour. I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts. Are you an artist bookmaker? Do you enjoy creating book objects as part of your practice? I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to know what you create. I'd be really interested to know if there's anything here that I've talked about that's resonated with you today. And I just thought I'd mention also that a couple of little classes that I sell, one of which is how I make these two different types of accordion books. So the ones that are just the plain ones I make for sketching, and also the watercolour ones that I make for these books that have the collaged botanical elements inside. So it's just a really inexpensive small little class. It's part of my a la carte menu of classes where you can just go and for a very small amount of money take a class on a specific practice that I have. So you can go and check those out in the description if you'd like. Thanks so much for being here and spending time with me today. If you made it to the end, how about you leave me a book emoji, since it was all about artist books today. And yeah, take care until next time, and I'll catch you then. Bye.